Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to give two short talks, about 10 minutes each. And then between the talks, you're just going to have a couple of questions to think about, and then also there'll be just a chance to get a cup of coffee or another cake or whatever. So this is the idea. So now we're looking at Zacchaeus, but really I think the story starts before Zacchaeus. And so I'm going to read this story. It's in Luke chapter 18. Doesn't matter if you don't have a Bible and you don't need it up at the front because I'm going to read it through. But as I go through, I'm going to try to comment on it. So, and as I do that, hopefully you'll see how this works in the theme of seeing and how we see. In fact, something of what I said 6 weeks ago, whenever I came to the last Cafe Church, kind of builds on this. So it's been quite nice to be able to build on that. So, as Jesus approached Jericho. Now, it's interesting that Jericho is if you Google this, I checked last night, it's the lowest city on earth. It's 256 meters below sea level. And it's also reputed to be the oldest city on earth. And what's kind of interesting as Christians, and I thought of this, and I don't know if commentators would agree, but we await the new city which is coming down from heaven, which will be the newest city on earth, as it were, and the highest city on earth. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? Just that, the lowest city on earth happens to be the oldest city on earth, which is Jericho. So Jesus is coming with a whole bunch of people in the wake, we didn't see it on the video because it was a story before that. And a blind man was sitting there on the roadside begging. And you can imagine there's this kind of, you're blind, you're sitting on the roadside, and you hear this huge crowd, excited crowd approaching. And he basically calls out to say, what's going on? What's happening? They told him, it said, verse 37, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Now, we can easily pass over that sentence and not think anything of it. But what's depressingly sad about that is that the people who can see are defining Jesus as the man from Nazareth, which takes no faith whatsoever. It's like saying John Mark from Bristol, rather than Jesus. Who is Jesus actually? So this comes out very apparently. So Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, and the blind man calls out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now that's quite an interesting thing. Who told him this Jesus was the Son of David? And why use the term Son of David? Well, the Son of David was a messianic promise. So now, when God, you see, the God we worship is a God who's constantly reaching out. Remember in the garden, Adam, where are you? He's constantly looking for it. And when and through Adam and then Abraham and later David, God made promises to different people. And he made a massive promise to David, which was that somebody in your line, your descendant, would be the Messiah that Israel needs to save them as a people. Now, if you look at the two genealogies of Jesus, you've got one in Matthew chapter 1, and we all know that's Joseph's genealogy, and Matthew organizes that very clearly from Abraham onwards. I don't know if you remember that, but there's 14 generations from Abraham to David, and then David to somebody else, I can't remember now, and then somebody else to Joseph, and that's all 14 chunks of genealogy or whatever. But in Luke's gospel, we've got a very different genealogy. How can Jesus have two different genealogies? Well, because the Luke's one is actually Mary's genealogy. And interestingly, they part, in other words, if you trace the two genealogies, they are totally different names. The only time they come together is in David, because Joseph's genealogy is Solomon, so that was one of David's sons, and Mary's genealogy is Nathan, another one of David's sons. So it's only in David that they come together, and after that they are different family tree, Mary and Joseph, all that time until the birth of Jesus. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, that this blind man can see that Jesus is the Son of David. In other words, he's the messianic figure. And here's the shock. Look at how the people say. So he called out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Those who led the way rebuked him and told him to be quiet. Why did they do that? Because he's a nobody. He knows nothing. He's a blind man. He's on the edge of society. He can contribute nothing to this conversation except that he's the only guy who's seen who Jesus really is. Everybody else thinks it's Jesus of Nazareth, which takes zero faith. So they try to shut him up. But what does he do? He calls all the louder. Now, I don't know if you know the story, but it would be interesting for you to imagine what you think Jesus is going to do at this point. Because what you think Jesus is going to do probably tells you what you have understood this far in life about the person of Jesus. Because basically, he calls all the louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and ordered the man to be brought to him. When he came near, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" What an interesting question, isn't it? I mean, of all the people who should know what this guy needs, I mean, Jesus, if he is the Son of God, surely he knows what this guy needs. But it doesn't take, I mean, anybody with eyes could see what this guy needs. He needs eyes. He can't see. But we've just heard him that he can see. In fact, he's the only person in the whole crowd that sees who Jesus really is. Everybody with eyes only sees Jesus of Nazareth. This man says, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And did you notice the direction of what he's asking? Have mercy. What does mercy mean? Well, mercy means compassion for the miserable. Compassion for the miserable, for the people who realize they need a way out. That's what mercy is. And it's interesting that nobody in the crowd was asking for mercy in light of seeing Jesus. I wonder why. Because I reckon they didn't see two things. One is they didn't see who Jesus really is. They were still calling him Jesus of Nazareth. I mean, that's irrelevant where he comes from. You know what I'm saying? But the second thing is they didn't see their need. That's why they weren't calling to him. They were following him because it must be incredible to follow Jesus and see these incredible miracles happen left, right, and center. I mean, that's better than Netflix. But, and I reckon if Jesus came along today and was in, Temple Meads or in the hospitals or whatever, there would be a massive crowd following because this stuff is the real deal. But interestingly, nobody sees their need for mercy. Nobody thinks they need Jesus. They just love watching him, and they're just enamored by all that he can do. So this man says, "Son of David." In other words, I can see who you are. You are the Messiah figure that we've been waiting for over 1,000 years. Why are you waiting for Jesus? Can you imagine that? I mean, if I asked you whether you need Jesus, it would be very interesting what you'd say. Because actually, in our culture, we've worked super hard to get rid of all our needs. I don't know if you've noticed that. Many of us live in relatively nice comfort, warmth, food. Only this last year have I lived hand to mouth, not knowing where my next money was going to come from. That's pretty much the first time in my life. Before that, I was on a salary all the time, and I just, the income was just in my bank. And it teaches you stuff when you're having to live like that. Growing up in Madagascar, one of the biggest things I think that changed me was growing up with people who were making £1 a day. If I saw a Malagasy driving a car, I used to think, where did the guy get all his money from? How can he afford a car? When you see all the people walking, you think, oh, they must love walking. Well, they can't afford the bus fare. So it's hard to see this. We even trying to mitigate against the future by things like insurance and pensions. They protect us against what possibly might go wrong in the future. So all the time, we are building a comfort blanket around us. But here's the thing, and C.S. Lewis said this, that suffering is God's megaphone. In other words, when things go wrong in your life, whether that be a health thing, a relationship thing, something wrong with your career, when things go wrong, you are perhaps in a most privileged position because for once, maybe you'll see that you need mercy. You need somebody to help you because you can't help yourself. And interestingly, only this blind guy seemed to need mercy that day. Tragically, everybody else was inches away from the God who created them, and none of them saw it. They just saw a man from Nazareth. lethal, isn't it? Oh, sorry. That happened at a funeral one time when I was taking a funeral. I was in the middle of the thing. I'd make a big speech about please switch off your phones and all the rest of it. And then my phone erupted in some sort of song. And to this day, it's never done that since. And it just erupted in the middle of my talk. And I thought, at first I thought, what moron has left their phone on? And then I thought, I think I know the one. And it was in my phone. And so, and interestingly, the two daughters it was a lady who passed away. And the two daughters, one of them said that was the highlight of the whole sermon. Because the lady who passed away was one of these ladies who would just get up and do stuff. Like she'd grab the microphone. One of the first times I ever, she grabbed the microphone and said, let me sing a solo. And I'm like, wow, okay, go for it. And she sang this solo in front of everybody, and I thought, heavens, And she was one of those colorful, creative sorts that just couldn't be kept down. And it was just funny that possibly even, maybe I could blame it on God, I don't know, but this mobile phone came off and burst into song. And this lady, the daughter, thought that was just perfect for my mother. Anyway, how do you pick up from that? So I think what we're going to be looking at is, so Jesus asked him this question, what do you want me to do for you? And he basically says, I want my sight. But look at what happens. Obviously, Jesus heals him. I say obviously because, you come to know Jesus. Of course, he's going to heal the guy. There's nobody comes to Jesus with a need without getting it met. That's unbelievable. Nobody. There's zero failure rates. So Jesus, of course, heals him. And the guy sees. The question is, what does he do with his sight? Does he go and get a job because for the first time forever he can actually pay his own way? Does he go tell his family because for the first time ever he's going to be useful to his family? No. It says he got up, immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus. In other words, he saw not just Jesus, the physical man, and not just the son of David. He saw that this guy really was the Messiah and was worth following with everything he had. And so literally he follows Jesus, praising God. And I guess he's in that crowd that we're going to meet in a moment with regard to Zacchaeus. So the question, or the two questions, I think they're going to come up on the board. Oh, bingo, look at that. When did you see Jesus, and what led you to seeing him in that way? So we're looking at the idea of seeing. Not all of you are going to have time to share with each other, but if some of you would like to bravely, courageously say, when did you first see Jesus? And you might have to explain what that means. And then what led you to seeing him in that way? Was it your need, or was it you were part of the crowd? So if we could just discuss those two little things in groups while I get a coffee. And you can get a coffee also if you want. And then we're going to pick it up after that. So, as somebody said, it's easy enough to ask these questions. When did you see Jesus? Answering them is quite difficult, isn't it? Yes, that's right. And that's the purpose of it. There's not always right answers. There's only answers that have caused us to think and reflect. So we're going to move on to the character of Zacchaeus. Doesn't matter if they'll just join in at the minute. They're not missing much. But what I mean is my punchline's at the end, not at the beginning, is it? So, yeah. So Zacchaeus, historically, we know him as a short man and a little man. And, that's actually turns out to be one of the least important things about him. But Jesus enters Jericho and was passing through Jericho on the way to Jerusalem, actually. Man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, a chief tax collector, and was wealthy. So I just wanted to explain to you what a chief tax collector was, because even in this country, I knew a tax collector once, and she didn't often tell people she was a tax collector, even though, actually, in this country, for the most part, what our taxes go on is commendable and actually is crucial for all of us. If you grow up in Africa or many other countries and you get cancer, for example, you remortgage the house to pay for that cancer, whereas we've got the NHS and we've got schooling and lots of things. But anyway, So a chief tax collector. The Romans had a very powerful and divisive way of reigning over their empire. And one of the ways that they did that was that in the Jewish situation like this, they would appoint or they give the power to Jewish people to collect the tax from their own peoples. Now, the way it would have happened, Zacchaeus would have had to anticipate or work out how much tax he could get from all of the people of Jericho. And there was lots of reasons you could be taxed. You could be taxed for growing things and then selling things, carrying things, lots of different ways that, that Romans would get tax from you. Because the Romans had to, empower their massive armies to go and conquer further countries. So they needed a huge income. And anyway, so the way they would do it was Zacchaeus in this case would have, that year, he would have bid to the Roman Empire, and he would have said, I think I can raise, let's just say, £100,000 worth of tax this year from the people of Jericho. And a couple other people might bid, and they might say, well, I think I can raise £95,000 worth of tax. And basically, the Roman Empire would probably give it to Zacchaeus. In other words, give him the right to get the tax from the people of Jericho because he said he can raise 100,000. Now, the tricky thing was, Zacchaeus had to pull that money up front, £100,000, let's just say. Obviously, it was denarii, but no. Give that up front to win the right to tax the people of Jericho for that year, if you know what I mean. So, can you see how divisive this is? This brings Jewish people against Jewish people because Zacchaeus is probably the most ambitious, maybe. He says, I think I can get 100,000 whatever from these people this year. And so the Roman government says, great. And then he has to pay the Roman government up front. And then that year, he has the right to be the chief tax collector and basically to get tax from all these different people with a lot of minions and different people underneath him working to raise this money of tax. A very divisive and a cruel way, really. But then the Romans did a lot of things that were cruel. So he's a short man, and the only significance in that, of course, is that we know he has to climb this sycamore tree. And some people think that sycamore tree still stands in Jericho. There is a sycamore tree that's quite central, right near the road. It's a very, very old tree. Possibly it was the same one that Zacchaeus goes into. Anyway, he wanted to see him. He couldn't see him. Climbed a sycamore tree because he wanted to see Jesus since Jesus was coming that way. Now, I've said the word see about 3 times, and I don't know if you know what that word means, because we've just had a story where a guy who can't see sees, and everybody who can see can't seem to see. So when Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus, what does it mean? Is it just that he wants to see what he looks like? Don't know. But it's interesting, isn't it, that Luke has put the blind Bartimaeus story just before this, just before coming into Jericho. So Jesus is coming into Jericho, a massive crowd. When Jesus reached the spot of the sycamore tree, he looks up. And I suppose to Zacchaeus' horror, he looks up. And everybody stops and looks up. Now, I don't know how many people were in that tree with Zacchaeus. But it's interesting that Jesus says to him, Zacchaeus. I mean, were there loads of other people up there? And he had to define which one he was talking to. Why did he use the man's name? Interesting, isn't it? Why does Jesus call us by name? Why? Yeah, it's okay, yes. Would you like to answer? Yes. Right.
He used his name because if he hadn't, who knows who would have come out.
Brilliant. That was entirely unrehearsed. But yes. Yes. Wow. I've never thought of that before. Thank you very much. What's your name, by the way? David. Means beloved one, doesn't it? Beloved. Yeah, beloved. Beloved of God. Wow. That's the name of my son. That's why we call him that, actually. It was because he's beloved, yeah. And actually, Izan was, she gave him that name. She felt God was saying, call him David. And I was determined to find the middle name for him because I thought, I'm going to have some sort of say in this whole thing. And I thought John, and I thought no. And then I thought Jonathan, yes, I really like the name Jonathan. So his middle name is Jonathan. And when I got home and I told Izan, can we put his, call him middle name Jonathan. She said, what does it mean? And I said, I don't have a clue. And so we looked at it, and it means gift of God. So beloved, gift of God. And David wasn't surprised. We weren't expecting him. And that's just interesting, isn't it, how God somehow has a little hand in our names. So well done, David. Hold on to your name. So he says to him, Zacchaeus, yes, in case everybody else came down for the chair, I don't know. But come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Now this, to go to a person's house was all about fellowship. Part of the reason why we've had cakes and all the rest of it now, and why we're having I say we, I'm probably not going to do anything to contribute to it, but at the end of the month, the church meal, why we're having that is because food always brings people together. I don't know if you've noticed, but if you've had somebody over for Sunday lunch, let's just say, and you hear a rumor about that person, later, I guarantee that if you've had them for Sunday lunch, you'll be much more reticent to spread or believe that rumor. Okay? Just one meal. Yeah. The power of food in bringing us together and building trust is incredible. That's why so much works around food. So Jesus doesn't actually say lunch, but he does say, I'm going to come to your house immediately. For some reason, there's a rush. And Zacchaeus drops everything. He came down at once, welcomed him gladly. Now, all the people see this and they mutter, hang on, he's going to this sinner's house. It's interesting, isn't it, how offensive it is that Jesus wants to spend time in the house and the presence of a man who's a chief tax collector. This guy works for the Romans. How do you compute this? And was this not partly what led to Jesus' death? Because it was just so offensive that this man who at some point would claim to be God, accept worship, accept anything, things that only God's supposed to be able to do, that this man would feel so comfortable with people who did not fit into what was right in society. And every society has people who are right and people who are not right. Sadly, the people who are right tend to find it hard to know why they need Jesus because they're right. See, I've been right for most of my life, as far as I can tell. That's partly why I wear a nice shirt and different things, because it's easy to look right on the outside. You know what changed my life was when I realized that God saw, actually, way past the shirt. He saw everything about me. And he still embraced me. And that's what unraveled my self-righteousness and actually helped me to embrace something far greater than that. So have a look, with Zacchaeus, he invites everybody, and like in the video showed, he probably had all other sinners, tax collectors, all there with Jesus, because it's like, can you believe it? Jesus has come to our house, so come on, guys. So there's a whole bunch of people. And Zacchaeus stands up and he says, Lord, look, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. If I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay them back 4 times. Now, Zacchaeus probably said lots of things, but let's just think about this one thing. Money, right? Where our treasure is, that's where our heart is, right? So immediately you can, if you're struggling to find your heart, just look at what you treasure, what you would never let go of, what you would be willing to do anything to keep. That's where your treasure is, and that actually is where your heart is. So when Zacchaeus is willing to part with half of all that he's amassed and give back 4 times to anybody who's cheated him, that shows that his heart has just moved. And what I want to do is to end with this one thing, because I made this point, which David elaborated on with regard to why did Jesus say Zacchaeus? How many men were in the tree that day? Did he have to say Zacchaeus? And you might say, well, that shows that he knows us by name. But let me tell you what, I think it shows us more. Because if you go even onto Google and you Google what the name Zacchaeus means, does anybody know what Zacchaeus means? We've talked about beloved. We've talked about gift of God. Zacchaeus, ironically, now remember, this is what his mother called him, probably, maybe father. They called him this. This would have been their dream for him. It means pure. How cruel was that when he became a chief tax collector and his mother thought, man, I named you pure and you're a traitor. You're working for the Romans. You're doing it possibly to get money. What kind of purity is that? And I'm not saying he was the worst guy ever. I mean, he probably wasn't. The fact that he could give 4 times back to people he cheated showed that he probably can't have cheated that many because he would have been absolutely broke. But pure, that was her ambition for him, to be pure. And for whatever reason, his life unraveled to the point where he was a chief tax collector, where he must have been so embarrassed to say, my name is Zacchaeus. It's like, no, I don't think it is. No. So when Jesus says Zacchaeus in front of all those people, what is he doing? He's calling out the true Zacchaeus from the Zacchaeus that had allowed life and compromise to transform his identity. And he said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to be with you today. And actually, by the end of today, you are going to be Zacchaeus. You're going to be pure. Because nobody can argue with somebody who's willing to give half of their riches away and 4 times to anybody who they've cheated. That is what Jesus is in the job of doing. Not calling us out on what we failed, but calling us out to become all we were ever meant to become. Pure. Come down out of the tree. You and I, we've got a life to live together. It doesn't say he left his job of chief tax collector. I think from then on he would have been the best tax collector ever, because everybody would have known that he's only doing what he has to do for the Romans. He's not cheating anybody. When we encounter Jesus, we don't have to leave our jobs. What we do is we do our jobs for somebody far greater than us. Because for the first time ever, we realize this is what I was made for. For the first time ever, I can be pure as a tax collector. What's the next question? I think there's just one, but it's a long one. How or why did being seen or known by Jesus impact Zacchaeus, do you think? Let's just try to help each other to unpack. How did this transform Jesus? How did hearing his name when he was hiding up in that tree and knowing what his name really meant and what should have been the shame of that, and yet he doesn't come down with his head hanging down. He welcomes eagerly. How did he know he was fully accepted by Jesus before he had given up half his possessions to the poor? How did he run down that tree and just throw his life open? How did realizing that Jesus saw him completely, how did that just free him to live life for the first time ever? Let's just spend a couple minutes in your groups. If you want to just explore this, try and talk about it. Don't worry if you bumble and you're struggling. Just try to put it into words, and just let's try to help each other to explore this. And then we're going to have a song in a moment to close this. But let's just discuss. And Lord, like that blind man and like Zacchaeus, we long to see who you really are. And not just to see who you are, but to realize that we are seen by you. We are seen by the one who sees us fully, embraces us in order to draw out who we were always meant to be. Each one of us different. Each one unique, but each one able to serve you, glorify you, and serve and bless others in unique ways according to the giftings you've given to us. Lord, we want to see you more. We want to realize that we are seen by you. Please help us, Lord. Some of us maybe at this stage don't know what to do next. We're not sure. We're not sure if we've seen you. We're not sure if we've realized that you see us fully. Like me when I was 16, we can just consciously and with our own mouths invite you, Jesus, to be the one who saves us, the one who invited into our lives, to be the most valuable one in our lives, to be the one that we want to now follow. Now that our eyes are opened, we want to follow. Now that we've realized you've seen us, we want to share the treasures that before used to mean so much to us and now are simply a way of showing how much we rather love you. And for some of us who've maybe followed you for ages, Lord, we want to say that we love you and that we see you because you see us and you call us. And we want you to continue to call us to become who we are to be. From this day to the rest of this life on earth, to be living for somebody greater than just treasures. To be living for you. In Jesus' name, we invite you to do this. Amen.